Good morning. There we are. Okay. Sorry about those brief technical difficulties. One of my favorite quotes is from Mark Twain, who said, "It ain't what you don't know that gets you into trouble. It's what you know for sure that just ain't so." And it seems like an apt introduction to today's topic, the retail apocalypse. Another case where we think we know something, but actually we don't really. And the result is the very thing that we mistakenly think is already happening. The old self-fulfilling prophecy. We think that brick and mortar is dead, and so we act in ways, we invest in ways, we run our businesses in ways that effectively make sure that that will happen. We were all familiar at this point, I imagine, with the narrative. One retailer after another declaring bankruptcy, closing stores, in some cases liquidating entirely, an ever-growing number of regional shopping centers going dark and turning into ruin porn on websites like deadmalls.com, Amazon's market share rising, its ambitions growing, its path to world domination assuming an aura of invincibility. Story upon story bombarding us with this narrative of retail apocalypse, a steady drumbeat from journalists in the mainstream press, from investors in the stock market, from the man on the street. And indeed, there have been a number of casualties. This list offers up some of the most well-known names that are no longer with us. And then there are the countless numbers of independently owned and operated retailers on Main Street that have given up the ghost as well. That's what we've been hearing, but it does not align neatly with the Canadian experience. Most of these high-profile liquidations are US-based retailers, and even some of the banners getting retired or downsized in this country can be attributed to strategic decision-making by US-based parent companies. Lowe's buying Rona Home Improvement, then closing a bunch of redundant locations here. Home Outfitters, done in as its New York City-based private equity owner, chooses to refocus on its two core assets, Saks Fifth Avenue and the Bay. And on the real estate side, regional shopping centers have retained more of their stability here, with sales per square foot, a key metric, increasing in almost all major Canadian malls in 2018. Partly, this is a simple matter of supply and demand. The U.S. leads the industrialized world with some 24 square feet of retail space per capita, 50% more than Canada, the distant number two. Less inventory of retail space means that Canada cannot fall quite as hard. Its vacancy rates will not drop as much. Its sales per square foot will remain relatively high. Indeed, many of the big and medium box retail categories in which the U.S. lost large chains were ones with two or three main competitors that have shrunk now to one. Canada's always been more in the one or two major competitors. And there's still been room for smaller formats here in Canada, which were long ago pushed aside in the U.S., like Kohl's and Sunrise Records. Indeed, with some U.S.-based retailers that had lost their way stateside, their Canadian divisions have been doing quite well, perhaps the best example being Toys R Us, which closed all of its stores in the U.S. last year, but has remained profitable for the last decade in Canada. So its 82 stores here were sold in bankruptcy to a Toronto-based holding company, which plans on not just keeping them open, but also expanding the number of locations. Similarly, Claire's Accessories, the U.S.-based tween and teen-oriented accessories chain, did not include Canadian operations in its recent bankruptcy filing and store closure plans. In fact, a number of Canadian brands have proved so popular that they have started to aggressively expand in the U.S., if not globally. Of course, there's the Lululemon juggernaut, but also Respect Your Universe, Aritzia, Arc'teryx, Canada Goose. All of these have been growing their store bases in the U.S. and elsewhere. Some are even acquiring struggling brands in other countries. Sunrise Records, which just was a few years removed from having converted 70 Canadian HMV stores, just rescued Britain's HMV from bankruptcy and plans to keep most of its 127 locations open. Same with YM Inc., which owns a number of Canadian brands you see in the malls, just bought Charlotte Russe out of bankruptcy in the US. Finally, Canada retains its appeal among international brands, with 50 new ones having arrived in 2018, followed by another 50 new ones in 2017, followed by another 30 in 2018, including US-based Red Wing Shoes, Japan's Uniqlo, Decathlon from France, and Britain's Mountain Warehouse. So let's go to the elephant in the room, e-commerce. Yes, its market share has continued to grow at the expense of brick and mortar, and it is forcing retailers to recalibrate how many physical stores they actually need as complements to their digital presence in an omni-channel world. And yes, this has obviously dampened tenant demand for ground floor retail space and caused a great deal of hand-wringing among property owners, leasing professionals, and other downtown stakeholders. But let's do some unpacking of these numbers. The percentage that you've probably read in the newspaper is that e-commerce accounts for roughly 9% of retail market share. But this is actually not the right number, for it includes a bunch of line items that really do not belong there. Like international sales, when a US consumer buys something online from a Canadian retailer, for instance. Like click and collect sales, that is, goods that were ordered digitally but retrieved in store. It also encompasses the fees that online shoppers pay for shipping and handling 33% of the time. And it does not subtract for online purchases that are later returned. With these and other amounts removed from the equation, one arrives at a more accurate percentage between 3 and 4%. And when you just consider pure play online retailers, and not the online sales of so-called legacy retailers, that percentage drops to roughly 2% in both Canada and the US. Right? Now, you might say, no way, that does not pass the proverbial smell test. But consider a few things. One, you might have read that Amazon just became or is about to become the largest seller of apparel in the United States. And technically this is true, but actually its overwhelming majority of apparel sales are in basic commodities. Look at their top 5 best sellers here on Amazon.com. Socks, briefs, and t-shirts. In terms of true fashion, on the other hand, it is still a ways away from becoming a serious threat. Its private label brands have not yet resonated. Designers are very reluctant to sell on its platform. And speaking more generally, most fashion shoppers prefer to see, touch, and feel before buying them. Finally, and this might be the most important point, e-commerce assumes that we only shopped in the past because we had to. And now, freed of the need to leave the comfort of our couches, we will just stop visiting physical stores. And instead do what exactly? Right? We forget that shopping, along all the other things that digital is supposed to free us from doing, are the stuff of life. And believe it or not, many of us like doing it. Right? Indeed, I do not think it's a coincidence that the original e-commerce pioneers were almost exclusively men. A gender not known for shopping as a leisure activity. The e-commerce hysteria, it also extends to the tenant side. The reality, which remains a secret among most of the general public, is that pure play online retailing is a huge margin buster. Given the high costs of customer acquisition, which grow over time as the pool of early adopters is exhausted, given the high costs of shipping, which, as you can see from this slide, continue to increase even for Amazon at its scale, and given the high costs of product returns, which are 3.5 times more common with online purchases than brick and mortar ones. It's just one big money pit. And absent any future game-changing developments, like drones, for instance, I would argue that e-commerce on its own is simply not sustainable, which is precisely why we are now seeing the rise of clicks to bricks. That is, digitally native retailers are starting to build networks of physical stores because they see them as essential to reducing the costs and giving the omni-channel model a fighting chance, right? Countless of these retailers, including many who said they would never open physical stores, have suddenly started to proliferate, across the US and increasingly Canada. Warby Parker, Athleta, Bonobos, Indochino, a Canadian brand, Untuckit, Casper Mattress, Everlane, Allbirds, Frankenoak, Oakenfort, I mentioned Indochino, 2 more Canadian brands, right? Indeed, that's even what Amazon has been doing, right? First with its Amazon bookstores, then with its Whole Foods acquisition, its Amazon Go convenience stores, its Amazon 4-star locations, and its most recent announcement of a new traditional mid-market grocery banner. Sorry about this. There's a lot of notes with this presentation. So, who is most impacted by all of this? All right. Yes, there have been retailers that have closed from e-commerce. First, there were the category killers, which you would think of as the big box retailers that fill power centers, right? These are the retailers like Linens and Things, Sports Authority, Future Shop, all of which are no longer with us, right? And the reason is because what they primarily traded on were 2 things that the internet can do better: selection and convenience, right? Now, more recently, what's been feeling the effects more is department stores and specialty apparel. In fact, department stores and specialty apparel account for the lion's share of store closings in the last 3 years, specifically the multi-brand retailers, like a department store, where you sell many brands that are not your own and that can easily be found elsewhere, right? Those are the retailers, whether they're department stores, whether they're boutiques that look like this, those are the retailers that have been most vulnerable. However, it's important to note that once you remove department stores and specialty apparel, all other segments of retail have actually been increasing in huge numbers. As you see in that slide, we've lost almost 10,000 stores and soft goods and department stores, and we've gained more than 18,000 in all other segments, right? As of this year, 75% of the store closures are just from 20 retailers, right? And even in fashion, there are losers, but there have been winners, literally, right? Off-price fashion continues to expand aggressively, both in the US and in this country. They offer a treasure hunt atmosphere, which is not easily replicated online. Cosmetics and skincare have also continued to grow amidst e-commerce's rise, largely because of the see, touch, and feel aspect. And activewear, athleisure, active lifestyle retail, there seems to be no end to this category. Of course, Canada can be blamed for starting it all, although we could pin that on Vancouver, I suppose. Even Lululemon has gone far beyond their original focus on yoga wear. So this is another area where stores continue to increase in number. For the retailers that have failed, what is going on? Well, while it's usually the culprit is considered to be e-commerce, and obviously that does have some effect, there are many other factors, often of their own doing, which account for their demise. Some of these retailers, Sears being perhaps the most notable example, have been struggling for a long time, and frankly, they've been able to sell online too. There's no reason why Sears couldn't have become a much stronger online player, but they didn't, right? So these are not surprises and would have happened in any event. Overexpansion, right? Forever 21, you might have heard the rumor that they are about to declare bankruptcy. They did earlier this year close their flagship store at Yonge and Dundas in downtown Toronto. Very much a case of overexpansion. They are in so many different countries, and in the US, they've been taking all of these large department store spaces. That's a lot of square footage, right? It was just too much square footage. Other reasons, brick and mortar competition. When you hear about department stores that are struggling, often, again, e-commerce is the first reason that's given. However, my contention is that department stores have been more done in by by the increase in off-price retailing that I mentioned earlier, right? By the spread of outlet malls across Canada in recent years, right? All of that has created brick and mortar competition for department stores that they have yet to figure out how to address. Next, crippling debt burdens. This is the most under-narrated part of all this, right? Most of the retailers that have gone bankrupt, it's been a common story, right? They were bought by a private equity firm in the 2000s with a lot of borrowed money, right? And then they had to pay back the borrowed money, right? While at the same time making investments in digital, in physical stores. Well, when a loan comes due, what gets priority? The loan, right? So those investments were never made, right? And eventually, they have to declare bankruptcy to protect themselves from their creditors, right? All the while, they haven't been updating either their digital presence or their store fleet, right? That's almost every bankruptcy in the United States can be explained in those terms, right? J. Crew, which has closed a number of stores across Canada. Again, the victim of a leveraged buyout. Okay, so finally I want to get to a little bit of the local context. Atlantic Canada, first I'll start with the malls. Just one of the top 30 malls is in Atlantic Canada. Just one of the top 30 malls in Canada is in Atlantic Canada. That's Halifax Shopping Center. And overall, $570 per square foot in sales, which is the lowest of 6 Canadian regions. But the Class A properties in Atlantic Canada have been holding steady, as you can see. Halifax Shopping Center, Avalon Mall, Micmac Mall, Champlain Place, Moncton. It's the second-tier centers that are in trouble, right? Furthermore, a bunch of brands have been expanding here, right? They have been discovering Atlantic Canada. And we wonder if some of these clicks-to-bricks retailers, which have so far focused primarily on the Torontos and the Vancouvers of the world, will start to find Atlantic Canada soon as well. A real question in retail is to what extent will they grow to the same scale as the legacy retailers once did, right? Will Indochino ultimately need as many stores as Brooks Brothers, right? Will they ever get to secondary and tertiary markets? Or will they stay focused on Toronto and Vancouver? That's a big question. What about downtown? Well, downtown's actually, there's been continued vitality. It's been the strongest it's been in a half century. In fact, downtown is to some degree becoming a victim of its own success, right? With escalating rents resulting from new construction, escalating retail rents, and with shopping centers increasingly looking to co-opt the model, right? You're hearing about malls trying to become community hubs, trying to poach the best independent merchants from main streets, right? These are all problems of success, right? And we should make sure to remember that, because 30 years ago, especially in the US, it was a very different story. And downtown is well positioned to deal with the e-commerce threat because it works to its inherent advantages. In certain ways, downtowns have had a good 60-year head start on shopping centers, right? We've been forced to adapt to changing realities in the marketplace much earlier, right? And as a result, we've perfected a formula, as evidenced by the maturity I just mentioned, right? And this involves growing and serving captive submarkets, residents, workers, tourists, students. I want to point out tourists in particular, because tourists are often in a very different mental space as other consumers, right? More prone to impulse shopping, right? Captive submarkets, they're not going anywhere else, right? Placemaking and texture, which is what this whole conference is about. And finally, leading not with mass market retail, but with food, beverage, and entertainment. And yes, boutiques in a supporting role, right? No, we're no longer going to be the primary shopping destination of our respective regions. That day has come and gone. However, that does not mean that shopping does not play a role, and that successful downtowns can't have a number of boutiques, right, that complement the food, drink, and entertainment focus. It's just that there's little margin for error there. Boutiques already operate on very low margins, right? Now they're paying higher rents, right, higher overhead, right? And just a little hit from e-commerce can make the difference between a profitable year and a down year, right? So the ones that seem to survive, they also follow a similar formula. They offer, again, unique brands, products, and/or atmosphere that cannot be found easily elsewhere. Ideally, they're vertically integrated, right? Service and loyalty emphasis, you've been hearing that for years. Other revenue sources, whether it's also online, whether it's events and fairs, whether it's even subletting portions of their space, right? Other revenue sources, right? And finally, real estate solutions. This is an interesting area of experimentation. You have a lot more co-location of retailers, entrepreneurs who basically locate in the same physical space and share in the pain of the rent, or they find second-tier spaces, whether it's kind of a slightly below-grade space that retains street-level visibility, or on a secondary side street like a Dresden Row, right? Or early going, when their area is still up and coming, they take advantage of programs to try to buy their buildings, right? So these are some of the ways in which they are not just fully or even largely dependent on their walk-in trade. So as you can see, I'm an optimistic sort. I don't believe that the sky is falling when it comes to retail, as is often implied. I'm optimistic about brick and mortar retail. I'm optimistic about downtowns. Brick and mortar is not dying. Yes, things do hang in the balance, but let's not inadvertently tip the scales towards what we fear, right? Let's not give our merchants, our investors, or our landlords reasons to give up on retail, because then they will, and then we really will be in trouble. Thank you.